Hi all, welcome to another episode of Saturday Architecture. We are in part two of the series Selling to Internal Customers. In this episode, we would deal with internal customers a little more deeply. We'll try to understand who they are, and in the next episode, we will say what do they want, right? Are the requirements that they have.
Right. So from IT's perspective, there is a customer and there is a customer of the customer, right? And which, for example, we were discussing about HR as a customer, right? So you're developing a system for HR for whatever the HR system requirements are, right? So for IT, the main customer is HR, but for HR, the customer is all of the rest of the organization, right? All the employees are their customers, right? So now the question is, how does IT think about who is their customer, right? Should IT think about whether uh, HR department is their customer or the all the employees are their customer, right? So this is for the development team and for the enterprise architect team to clearly understand who the actual customer is.
Provider, right,
Mhm.
is the one who is providing the IT service. So there is a provider, right,
Mhm.
who is probably one type of person you should deal with.
Mhm.
And the other person is the other customer who we need to deal with is the regulator,
Mhm.
right? The regulator can be your security team in an
Mhm.
internal scenario, okay?
Or a
Or,
compliance team or a
or a
compliance.
compliance team, okay?
Mhm.
Or a compliance team which is there. So these are key customers which are either help you or block you from adoption.
All the
As you
stakeholders. They are all the stakeholders.
they
Yeah.
are all the stakeholders. So, for example, if you can get the regulator on your side, adoption is easy, right?
Right.
If you are an employee, you have to do this. Okay, then you
Yes.
don't have to worry about the other thing. Poor architecture, but
Right.
okay.
Right.
Then there is the actual aggregator of the service before it reaches. Like, for example, an HR application could be that.
Right.
Um, then you have the actual end users of the application who are associates or employees. And in your discussion, I think the other thing that became clear is, at least in the service management industry, which is like IT kind of a thing, there is a differentiation between customer is somebody who pays for it and user is somebody who uses the application, right? Um, Probably, I think to get away from this confusion, it is what I understood is it's better to use the persona. Who
Right.
are the personas that we are dealing with to get adoption easier,
Right.
right? Rather
Yeah.
than,
I,
uh,
I think one important point to clarify here is when we are talking about this adoption is to look at that what is it that we are trying to get adopted. It is not the uh, anything which is mandatory, right? So mandatory things will get adopted with or without effort they will get adopted, right? So all because it's part of a mandatory business process, you have to use it. People will use it happily or unhappily, they will use it, right? So what we're talking about adoption here is things which are increasing productivity or they are optional for people to actually consume. Adoption of those technologies, adoption of those services, how do we make those things happen? So I think that clarification is important for people to understand that what is it that we are trying to get adopted.
I think, yeah, I think we should have discussed that in the first episode itself, right? It
Right.
is one
Right.
basics thing. Be very clear that I think it's very important for us as IT guys to be say the end user has an option to be live life without using this. We have to
Yes.
acknowledge that,
Yes. Yes.
right? We kind of go in telling, oh, they don't need to do that, they can only do this,
Right.
right? I think we have to remember that they always have the right to use that, and I have to convince them to use this. We have to keep
Yes.
that in mind.
So
That's
they
a
have to
great
have that
point.
competition in mind that you're competing with some other option.
You're competing with status quo. which is very
Yeah,
hard.
status quo is an option, right? Status
Ah,
quo is an option, right?
already chosen option.
Already chosen, default option.
Yeah. Okay. Then there was this question which came from Murugan, that who's a sponsor, right? I think that's also an important question. The persona of sponsor is very important for any adoption. And uh, I realize that sponsor is somebody who can say, this is the business value we are going to get out of this initiative. They should be the person making the statement. The IT does not have a credibility to say, this business value we have to get. I mean, how from IT, how can I go and say increase sales by 30%?
Right.
I don't have the credibility to do it. It's not my thing. I can say, oh, the CEO wanted the sales to increase by 30%. I'm going to enable you. But I cannot say, to increase sales by 30%, use this feature. Right. So why should I increase sales by 30? Who are you to? So I think it's very important that sponsor is the one who would actually set a business goal.
Yes.
Very clearly, and then say, this IT capability or initiative is going to align with that.
Right.
So if you don't do that, then we can say the business goal is going to get missed. I think the sponsor has to make the statement. That's very important for a sponsor.
Yes. Yes.
So a sponsor is one who has to make a business statement. If the business make, and I think this also became interesting there. If the sponsor makes a technology justification, then it will also fail.
Yes.
Like a sponsor cannot say, oh, the entire world is going to AWS, we should also go to AWS. It doesn't make sense to the end user. Right? As CEO, why are you telling we should go to AWS? That is the CTO's problem.
Right.
So the CEO also doesn't have the credibility to make the statement that we should go to AWS or Azure.
Right.
So I think that is
choosing the right sponsor is also very important for adoption, right? Because for an adoption effort, it is possible that somebody was the sponsor of for building that product, right? It is possible that somebody else was, maybe somebody in HR was responsible, had been the sponsor for building that product. But for adoption, there may be a need to identify a different sponsor who has the credibility to make sure that it actually gets adopted and make that business justification of why this technology or this service should be adopted, right?
So that's actually interesting, right? Okay, so the sponsor itself, we've got two personas. One is a build sponsor, and one is an adoption sponsor. If both are same, good for us.
It is good for us, yes.
But I think that's a great point, because usually we look at the build sponsor and kind of assume them to be an adoption sponsor, and it falls flat.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, and it could be different for a very large organization. It could be different for different areas, right? You can have sponsor. So, means if you go back to some of these frameworks which talk about adoption, they talk about these sponsorship networks, right? Where it is not about just identifying one sponsor, but you need to have these sponsorship network where you have champions at lower levels who will take the message from the sponsor and sort of percolate it down so that adoption actually happens, right? So there are some methods available in some of the frameworks which actually talk in detail about how do you work with sponsorship.
Super. So if you have to summarize the whole thing in a couple of sentences, Deepak, what would you tell?
Yeah. So one is making sure that we identify all the personas that are engaged in the adoption process, right? Who are the sponsors, who are the champions, who are the actual users, what each persona is intending to get out of adopting this product or a service, right? So that is very important for uh, for the IT team to identify who's trying to get adoption. And in many cases, you may have to build a specific kind of sponsorship networks for the kind of adoption which you're looking for, right? And finding the right sponsor is itself a responsibility which needs to be taken care by the adoption team, right? So adoption should be seen as an explicit activity rather than an implicit activity, right? Adoption will not automatically happen. We should not assume it will automatically happen, unlike the case of WhatsApp, right? So in an internal scenario, you should not assume that your product is so great that it will automatically get adopted, right? So you have to spend effort on finding these personas, finding the sponsor, and making that effort explicitly to actually make that adoption. And actually the selling actually gets fruitful in that sense, right? If the selling is fruitful only when somebody actually, you may have sold it in the sense that people are willing to pay for it, but if they don't use it, then the sale has actually failed in that sense, right? Because there won't be any updates, there's no maintenance, and the whole thing falls apart over a period of time, right? So that's so that explicit effort for adoption is required.
Thanks, Deepak, for the summary. In the next part, we will dwell deeper into requirements, which would have both implicit and explicit requirements. Thanks all for joining. Connect with you in the next episode.